why did she have to wait until her students left and kind of say that as part of the exit, of this appointment?
How did you find carnivore?
I struggled for many, many years with some basically chronic digestive problems. And it started around when I was a teenager. And I'm in my, I guess, mid to late 30s now at this point. And so my journey really started in my teen years, and I started paying a lot more attention to diet and lifestyle and how all of those factors were affecting me probably in my early 20s or so. And so just to kind of recap on all the symptoms, I was experiencing a lot of IBS related things. So I would have, after eating, I'd have a lot of pain, bloating, gas, just a lot of discomfort pretty much every time I ate. And there would be sort of these what seemed random to me, times where I would be just having like somewhat of a spasm, and I'd have to, run to the bathroom, and it just started to become a huge anxiety for me because I never knew really when that was going to happen. And I felt like every time I consumed food, it was like, is something going to happen? How's this going to affect me? Are people going to find out? I'd be in the bathroom for sometimes an hour just trying to make something happen, and nothing would happen. So like I said, started around when I was 15, 16, and I was really embarrassed about it. I didn't want anybody to know that was a problem for me. And so I really didn't talk about it or tell anyone. And then, like I said, in my early 20s, I started realizing like, hey, maybe this is related to what I'm putting in my body, like literally the types of foods that I'm eating. And so maybe my diet has an impact or could have an impact on this. And so that was really the main issue that I struggled with for the longest period of time. There's been a few other things along the way, notably some skin issues too. Early to mid 20s, I started getting some psoriasis, and I did seek out some help for that. I tried the steroid creams and things like that. But there was never any discussion about diet or, having an impact at all on that. Same kind of story when I did seek out some help from some doctors related to my gut issues. They were basically saying, well, keep taking these fiber pills, keep doing what you're doing because you're getting, intermittent results. And those answers were just never very satisfying for me. And so, early to mid 20s was a pretty difficult time, just trying to figure out which path to go down, who could help me, who really couldn't. And that's when I really started getting into nutrition research and starting to just experiment. And so at that time, I was starting to read about plant-based and vegetarian. I think my first encounter with that was through the book, The Blood Type Diet, where it basically says that whatever your blood type is, there's a nutrition plan that should work for you and kind of, help you reset and get back to normal. And so my blood type diet said that I should be vegetarian. I should avoid meat and dairy. And I think it allowed for eggs or something like that. But, lots of grains, lots of legumes, all that kind of stuff, vegetables. And so I decided to try that, but quickly realized that that was making my problem incredibly worse. Every time I would eat beans and rice, or I'd make lentils, or different, trying to get complete proteins, and still pair everything so I was getting the nutrition I needed, but I would find that I would be so incredibly bloated and have so much pain, and my constipation would get way, way worse. And so I would kind of go on and off of this thinking, well, this has to be healthy, right? Fruits and vegetables are healthy. That's common knowledge, right? And, whole grain, brown rice, all this kind of stuff, that's healthy for us. So what is wrong with me, that this isn't working for me? And sort of over that time period, feeling like a failure was something that I really started to develop mentally there too. Like, oh, I'm just a sick person. This healthy way of eating, is supposed to work, but it's not working for me. So there must be something inherently wrong with me, or I'm not doing it right, or something like that. And so I would kind of go through these periods where I'd be pretty adherent to whole foods. I still ate meat from time to time, but I experimented with some vegan and raw vegan for time periods throughout that time. And, I never felt any relief. And so probably about my mid-20s or so, I decided that's when I got a really bad psoriasis flare up, and my whole body was covered in these spots. And that's when I actually went to the dermatologist, and she said, well, here, take this steroid cream. But after there were a bunch of medical students in, 4 medical students in my exam at that time. And she waited till they all walked out of the room. And then she came up to me and she said, and I was living in Florida at the time, there's plenty of sun. And she said, you know what you really should do is just go out to the beach and don't wear any sunscreen and just expose as much of your skin as you can to the sun. And it was sort of this backdoor suggestion. And that is something that struck me at that point in my life, was okay, that seems simple. That seems low cost, relatively easy to do. Why did she have to wait until her students left and kind of say that as part of the exit, of this appointment? And so there were little things like that started to happen around that time period too, where I was starting to feel like I was running out of options. But then little things like that would happen where I'm like, you know what, maybe there is a way, and I just don't know, what it is yet. And so that was kind of the time when I started looking into paleo and more of an ancestral approach to diet and lifestyle. And I remember reading, there was a blog, I think it's still up, called Paleo Leap. And I found that website. I remember just reading everything I could get my hands on there and clicking on all the links, and just light bulbs were going off in my head going, oh my gosh, we need fats in our diet. That makes so much sense to me. We need sunlight. We're meant to eat a whole foods diet, but cutting out the grains was a major difference that I was seeing. Taking grains out was seeming to really help people. And I started to find people who had digestive problems, autoimmune type symptoms, things that I could identify with, and they were seeming to do better, switching over to this. So I immediately changed. I started adding more meat, olive oil, and I cut the grains. And so that was kind of the first time I felt some relief that was significant. And it got better probably for 2, 3, 4 months. And then I noticed I kind of plateaued, and I didn't get any really further benefit after that. This is also kind of the time when I realized how bad my brain fog had been, because some of that began to lift. And I was like, oh, I can actually focus on a task for more than 20 minutes, or I can read through this article and actually kind of understand and recall what I read versus having to go back and read it 2, 3 times or take a bunch of notes. I just started to notice this little bit of light coming in back into my, my cognition. And so I thought, well, that's a good sign. And so I kind of just kept down that path for a little while. And then the more I read and the more I discovered low carb and more people who were in these kind of healing forums and things like that, the more I realized, okay, it's sort of this game of cutting things out until you see where you're at. And that idea started to come into my mind, where it's like, okay, I really can experiment. I really can, cut things out. Because we're always told, well, if you eliminate a food group and it's not a balanced diet, then that's, by definition, not healthy. And this is kind of the time period where I started to break free from that, where it's like, okay, if these foods make me feel bad, I don't have to consume them, because there must be something about it that for whatever reason is not working for me. Maybe someone else can eat it and be fine. But so I was kind of coming out of this place of feeling helpless and hopeless into a place of like, okay, self-experimentation is the way to go for me until I feel good. And I would hit bouts where I doubted myself, over the next few years, but that really became my goal. And so I would kind of slowly cut it out, started cutting out the starches like the sweet potatoes and things like that. Avocados, I noticed, really upsetted my my digestion. And so I would kind of just slowly remove certain things and try adding other things back in over the next few years. And I'd say probably around 27, 28 or so is when I really started hearing more about keto and the ketogenic way of eating. And so I thought, okay, it kind of made sense to me, because I thought, okay, when I do have a lot of these starches, or if I have bread or something that's not normally what I consume, I do notice the higher my carb content, essentially, the more brain fog I seem to experience and the more lethargy and fatigue. Fatigue was something I struggled with really bad throughout this whole time too. And I had a very active job. I worked in restaurants as a server and bartender. And so I was always on my feet, walking and moving and carrying things and lifting things, and, had a very active job. And so I would be like incredibly tired, drinking Red Bulls all the time to try to stay awake and have energy and be in front of people and kind of, maintain that. And so I would notice, excuse me, based on what I was eliminating, that my energy would change too. And so I thought, okay, maybe this lower carb thing is what I need to pursue. And so I started cutting out the starchy vegetables, things like that. And I kind of whittled my way down to all of the low carb vegetables, which are mostly cruciferous, like broccoli, kale, spinach, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, all that kind of stuff. And then meat and animal fats, but I was also using like olive oil, avocado oil, that kind of stuff, eating some olives and tomatoes, bell peppers, cucumbers, things like that. So pretty low carb. But again, it was kind of that thing where I would notice a pretty big improvement. And then several months into it, I would kind of say, okay, well, maybe this is as good as it gets, and this is as best as I can feel. And so let's see. Okay, so I was eating still all of these low carb vegetables. And that's kind of when I found now I can't think of the name of it. The FODMAP, low FODMAP diet, specifically for people with digestive issues. And almost everything on that low FODMAP diet were things like, I was eating all of the high FODMAP foods, essentially, all of the cruciferous vegetables, garlic, onions, things like that. And so I thought, okay, keto or low carb is the best I've felt. But yet now all of these vegetables that I'm consuming for my carbohydrates are all of the vegetables that are saying are the most disruptive for my digestion. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe I need to start cutting these out. So I cut out 90% of those things, and I was down to, I would buy these giant packs of the organic mixed salad greens. So it was like spinach, arugula, and whatever other lettuce was in there, and then olives, cucumbers, bell peppers, and then the meat and the fats, oils that I would add. And at that point, it was pretty good, but I would still be bloated. I still had a lot of gas after eating. I would feel a lot of lethargy after eating. And, then it was kind of a time period of like, okay, maybe this is where I can deal with it. But then there were a couple times where I would just be kind of busy, or like I got to run to work, but I just grabbed some meat out of the fridge that I had, or some bacon or something, and just eat that. And I was thinking about it, and I thought, when I just eat meat, nothing seems to happen. And it didn't really click for me until one day I was just like cooking some meat up in the kitchen, and I thought, maybe meat's the only thing I can eat. Like maybe that is all I can tolerate. And so at that point, so kind of slightly before that, I had really taken a break from doing research, and I was getting really overwhelmed and like, well, you should do this and you should do that. And I, was trying to go back inside and just say, okay, how do I feel? But then when I had this experience thinking, well, maybe it's just the meat that I should have. Then I went back and kind of started searching for that. And I found Zero Carb Zen, which was the first carnivore resource that I ever encountered. And it was a blog about a woman who, had a very long health journey herself, a lot of self-experimentation, and she was doing an all meat diet. And I thought, okay, this is a thing, some people are doing this. And then people like Sean Baker started popping up. And this was back in, I think, 2018 or so, maybe 2019. And so it was starting to become, known a little bit. And Michaela Peterson's story popped up. And I really resonated with her story too, just from like an inflammation. I didn't have the arthritis that she had, but I thought, holy crap, like if that degree of inflammation and, mental health and all the things that she struggled with, if that got better, then maybe I can too. And maybe this is the way. And so I got on board right away and was just like, okay, no more vegetables, no more fruit. I wasn't really eating fruit anyway, but there's a caveat in this whole story, which is that I drank alcohol throughout this whole time. And alcohol was something that was really hard for me to give up. I was in bartending, restaurant industry, it's part of the culture there. And so that was something that I still consumed, like low carb drinks. But I think looking back on, this is my first round of carnivore, that definitely had an impact. And so that's something that I discuss more now in my videos about how I'm, working through things now. But essentially, about 3 months into being fully carnivore, all of my gut symptoms were gone. So I could eat, I had no gas, no bloating, no pain. There was a transition period where I would, have loose stools and things like that, like a lot of people experience, dropping that last bit of fiber and vegetables. But I had progressively weaned myself down over so many years that the transition was relatively fast, I feel like, for me. And so that was all the confirmation I needed at that point, that this was really, like, I could actually feel this good. The brain fog started to lift. I could, function at work much more efficiently. I felt fantastic. And that anxiety that you feel around food, and it becomes this disordered relationship with food where you're always afraid of food, afraid of, how much can I eat? Can I eat in public? Can I go to this party and not eat? And what are people going to think? And like all of that just goes away because you just feel better. And you know that this food I can trust. This food isn't going to hurt me. And so I at least have something to build off of that. And so that was really an incredible healing time. And then I'll kind of fast forward a little bit to where I am today. So I got pregnant with our daughter when I was about almost a year into carnivore, my first time. And pregnancy was kind of tough for me. I felt pretty sick and had aversion to almost everything for about the first 2 trimesters. And so I did my best to stay low carb, but I really ate essentially like a low fiber diet. I had meat and I would eat some white rice, things like that, just to kind of, it was whatever could settle my stomach basically at that time. So did my best, but definitely did not stay completely carnivore throughout that whole period. And then that's been my journey now over the last couple of years, is to get back onto this. And I've kind of struggled through that. And I think all our struggles are purposeful. And I think a part of the reason that I struggled to get back on it was to really fully understand how addictive some of these processed foods are, which I had not been consuming at all on my first, health journey. Well, I shouldn't say not at all, but probably the last 3 to 4 years, I didn't eat any, processed food. But out of convenience and being tired and being a new mom and kind of, having a lot of transition in my life, I did over the last couple of years kind of lean into some of those foods that I would never really eat before. And so I now understand on a personal level, like how hard it is to let some of these things go because they're so addictive, and they give you that high in the moment and they give you that spike of energy in the moment. And it's really difficult to let that go sometimes. So that's sort of been my struggle that I've been working through the last couple of years. And now I'm right up close to 60 days carnivore again. And so definitely feeling better. And I would say digestive wise, there was definitely some major healing that took place over that first almost year period, because when I did introduce some foods, some of my symptoms did come back, but it was nowhere near to the extent that they were in the past. So I'd say maybe 30 to 40% of what I would have experienced years prior was what had returned. And so I did have some constipation and stuff too, but nowhere near. But I have struggled more on in this transition and moving back into carnivore again with my skin. And so I notice, if I have some black pepper, or if I have some garlic powder, or if I have I've been making chicken tenders with pork rind crust and stuff like that, and egg batter. And it's like, I will notice inflammation right away in my skin if I kind of veer off track at all. And so that's kind of where I'm at right now, is just really trying to tweak and dial things back in to find out where exactly I need to stay for a while. So
Yeah. Wow. So that's quite a journey of exploration, right? Often you hear the story of like, I felt bad, I had these problems, so I just found out about carnivore and went into carnivore. But you've kind of been going through this for so long, like you really stepped, and as you say, your transition was over an extended period of time, right? So it was kind of all the way through kind of low carb keto all the way up to carnivore. Interesting. So I'm guessing you've always been around the same kind of weight. Like you
yeah,
didn't
give or
really have a
take.
weight problem.
No, not in a significant way. I'd say I actually don't weigh myself anymore, really, unless I'm at a gym that has a scale and I'm just curious. But I'd say there's probably been a time when I maybe weighed 15 pounds more than I do, maybe 20, but it's been quite a while. So yeah, most of my issue with weight has been, I think, like bloating and holding a lot of inflammation and water and things. So I would actually have to have different clothing sizes in my closet, like for pants and things to wear to work, depending on my digestive condition, basically. Like I would be a pant size bigger if I had had a meal and I was bloated, versus if I was fasting or I was too scared to eat for 2 days and so I didn't, type of thing. So but weight loss wasn't ever really a major concern.
So the reason I ask is because one of the most common comment I receive on the channel is from people who they're not overweight. They want to do carnivore. They're not overweight, but they're so concerned about losing too much weight. Or people that have been on carnivore or a low carb diet, and they lose weight too rapidly and they feel like I'm looking too thin. Did you experience any of that along the way, like losing too much weight?
I can't say that I did. I've always been interested in fitness, and I've been doing yoga for a really long time. And so my goals were really more related to putting on muscle and maintaining a good body composition. And there were some times when I'm like, okay, I want to lose 5 to 10 pounds. But what I've realized over time is that so much of that was this fluid retention and inflammation and things like that my body was holding on to, not necessarily body fat. So I never found that I lost too much weight. I think like even right now, I don't really intermittent fast. I shouldn't say that. I don't pressure myself to eat within a window. I'm not doing OMAD right now. I'm really trying to just listen and understand, okay, what are my true hunger signals and all of that. And so I think it's really important to, if you're concerned about that, I wouldn't force yourself to fast. I wouldn't force yourself into OMAD unless that's something that truly feels comfortable and satiating and a good place for you to be. But I think that's something that you feel like, okay, if I'm carnivore, then I kind of have to do OMAD, or I kind of have to fast all the time. And so that's what I would let people know is like, you don't necessarily have to do both of those things. You probably will fall into a natural eating cycle where you're just not hungry for 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 hours a day. And that's perfectly fine. But I wouldn't say that, conscious fasting, really strict fasting, that might be something you want to avoid for a time being if you're concerned about losing too much. And then something I've been experimenting with too is playing around with my fat ratio. So I know that if I add too much fat, I will put on weight. If I kind of just smother everything in butter or eat, tons of fat on a steak and add butter, I will start to feel like, a little heavy and bloated a little bit, and like I'm putting weight on, my clothes fit tight. But then on the other end of that, if my fat goes too low, then I'll start feeling kind of those symptoms of the time when I, had a really negative relationship with food and would over fast or, eat a lot and then perhaps do something about that. And so, that can get into the over restriction feeling in my body, like I'm not getting enough. And so I think it's such an interesting thing to get a hold of again in our society, where we go, where it's food, snacks, drinks, all that have calories and sugar and things in it. So, I think I've developed a relationship with myself now where I can tell if I'm teetering too far on one end or the other of that. And so that would be my advice or suggestion to someone who's concerned with losing too much is make sure that you eat enough. And a lot of times that's more than, especially for us ladies, we think that we are allowed to, or we should eat, or that we're used to eating. So yeah, it's really about just tuning in and reconnecting with what true hunger feels like and what satiation feels like.
I think there's a natural inclination as well to feel like, well, this is a diet, so that means I have to, like, I can't go overboard with the volume I'm eating.
Right.
And so you naturally just feel like I have to restrict, even if it's, subconscious. But you mentioned butter. I remember, I don't know, about 8 months ago, there seemed to be this kind of craze going around, people eating sticks of butter all the time. Have you ever been into that?
No, I did watch some of those videos, and that's kind of what got me thinking about, okay, maybe I'd experienced some more hormonal healing or hormonal balance, because that's something that post-pregnancy, and I breastfed for about 2 years. That was part of my struggle, was feeling like my hormones are just wacky, and it'd be mood swings, and that affected my blood sugar. And so trying to wean off the carbs was really hard, and I would feel really, really terrible sometimes. And so that did get me thinking, like, well, maybe I just wasn't eating enough fat, and maybe that's what my body needs to kind of help balance me out. And so I definitely didn't, again, like count, okay, here's all my tablespoons, I'm going to eat this full stick of butter every day. But I did kind of run about a 2-week experiment where I intentionally put more butter on my food. And I got mixed results, and maybe I should just try it for longer. But like I said, I did feel like I was definitely, my clothes were fitting tighter, and I was just feeling kind of, just a little heavy. Like it was too much. And so I cut it back after about 2 weeks. So with the trends and things like that, I would say, sometimes they might look viral, or they might look like, oh, this is the answer. And that's fine. It might be the answer for some people, but I'm all for maybe like dialing it down a couple notches and then trying it and saying like, okay, maybe I should add some butter or some more fat and see how I do, and then assess from there. So I think the trends can spark some curiosity and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean that it's what everybody should do.
Yeah, very, very well said. I think one of the things that I've certainly realized from being on carnivore for over a year is it feels like it really comes down to the individual, and you really got to test what's going to work for you best, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So just taking a step back, you mentioned you had a lot of fatigue working in the restaurant at the end of the day. So I imagine, kind of the end of a shift, you felt pretty exhausted. You've been running around all shift, looking after a lot of different people. Did that change at all, transitioning into a new way of eating with carnivore? Did you feel after you've expended all that energy, did you still have a little bit more in reserve afterwards?
I would say definitely. So in that industry, you're typically working evenings into the night, sometimes early morning. And so, the first probably 3/4 of my career, or whatever you want to call it, in that work would be, okay, we're done. Let's sit down and basically drink. And it would be the party life after that. And so, because everybody would be exhausted. And so that was sort of what I got used to doing, was just, okay, get home, have some drinks, pass out. And so that habitual way of dealing with fatigue and using unhealthy habits to kind of cover up the pain or the weak or the tiredness and things like that, still being able to be like, oh, have fun and hang out with people after that was something I got so used to that, again, when I've now cut alcohol out of my life, that's when I really noticed the biggest change, I would say, in that regard, is that I can, and my life's different now. I'm a stay-at-home mom, so I'm not working in the restaurant anymore, but having a little one will exhaust you almost in a similar fashion. So,
Right.
but I do find that I can sit down now in the evening and I can do some stretching, or I can take a bath, or I can finish cleaning something and just kind of wind down in a way that's much more natural, and while still getting something done, or so it's not this state of feeling so tired and so depleted and so just run down that I'm turning to unhealthy habits to kind of mask that or give me energy or keep me just running, And so that's something I'm still interested in learning more about, kind of like this chronic fatigue type of thing. Like, I don't know if that's officially what I would be diagnosed with, but that's what I felt a lot of the time. And so I know that there's like, diet's very important and nutrition's very important, but there's also other lifestyle factors that contribute heavily to fatigue and tiredness. And I think stress is one of them. And some of these maybe unhealthy habits that we have on the side can contribute to that. And even just how we're thinking, mindset, self-talk, all that kind of stuff really, really has a big impact, at least for me. And so those are some of the things that I'm really working with right now to support my healing and the benefits that I'm getting from the diet. But I would say overall my energy is increasing, and I am able to tolerate more and more stress and handle that better, and all those things.
You talked before about when you're eating, it sounds like you're kind of just eating as you get hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have a plan, like every day I'm getting up and I'm having breakfast or anything like that. So, um, how does that kind of work with other people in the house? How does everything coordinate together?
It's actually working out pretty well. So my fiance, he's still in restaurants, and so it's sort of that similar schedule where we wake up, we have family time in the morning, so breakfast is kind of our family meal. And so um, I was never a breakfast eater for years and years. I'd always just drink coffee and fast throughout the morning. But I have kind of started eating something when I wake up. It's usually not a huge meal, but I find that the more I take the coffee away and the more I've taken now the alcohol out from the nighttime. And so I'm waking up feeling better. And I'm finding that my appetite, there is an appetite there in the morning that maybe I've just kind of been repressing for a long time. And so I've started kind of eating something in the morning, usually a small meal, and then I will see how I feel throughout the day. So, yeah, I'll usually cook up a big breakfast. Ben's eating steak and eggs, and little one will usually eat eggs and bacon, something like that. And then I am pretty much living on burger patties. I love, like, even more than steak, I would rather eat a burger patty. And so I'll usually have maybe, a couple small patties. And then if I'm hungrier, I'll eat more. If not, I'll eat a little less. And so we get to share that family meal. And then, Ben goes to work, and then little one and I kind of do our thing for meal wise for the rest of the day. So, yeah, I've noticed that eating in the morning it does help with anxiety. It kind of helps to, ground me in a sense, where I think maybe waiting too long to eat and then just like drinking a bunch of coffee was not, was making anxiety worse. I mean, that sounds obvious, but when you're habitually doing that for so long, it's kind of like, this has to be right, until you try something different. And then you realize, oh, maybe I've been hungry this whole time and I just didn't listen. And so I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. And so Ben is also doing carnivore with you?
He's pretty close. He's definitely on board for it, but he is a sushi chef. And so
Oh, wow.
he's going to eat certain things here and there at work, and obviously trying things that he's making and stuff like that. And so, but it's funny, as sort of a side note, one of the books that I read when I was kind of getting into that low FODMAP discovery was Fiber Menace by Konstantin Monastyrsky. And he talks about, the role that fiber has in IBS and ulcerative colitis and all these things. And that book blew my mind. And I believe, if I remember right, the diet that he eats is sort of like a Japanese diet, or I guess what he calls a more traditional Japanese diet, where, fish, but it's essentially low fiber, so he still eats, the author of this book, like sea kelp and white rice and things like that. But then all the meats and fat on top of that. I'm not sure if that's technically a traditional Japanese diet. I've heard varying accounts of what that would look like. But I thought that was interesting that that's kind of the diet that the proponent of not eating so much fiber eats. And that's sort of in alignment with, I'd say, where Ben's diet is.
Can you imagine ever going back to a regular way of eating?
No.
No.
This is my regular. Yeah. No.
So, of all the improvements that you've seen, what's the number one thing that would keep you eating this way?
I mean, it's a dead even split between digestive health and mental clarity. I mean, the mental clarity and the brain fog and the sort of depressive / anxious, apathetic, these moods that would cloud over my life. I didn't even realize how bad they were until they went away, or mostly went away. And so, asked me 3 years ago and I would have said 100% digestive health. But now I guess, more of us are discovering how, in fact, linked those things are. And so maybe they are one cohesive symptom. But it's literally night and day, the difference in my gut health. And I think there's so many people that suffer with that are embarrassed and that don't seek help, or that settle for mediocre results with taking Miralax or fiber pills like I was doing. Or, I don't even get into all the enemas and the colonics and all these things that I tried to do to handle this, and all the money I spent on supplements and cleanses and, probiotics and all of this stuff, and with really no benefit. And so this diet has been the only thing that has kept me basically in remission for long periods of time. And so, I cannot imagine ever returning to, having a diet significantly different than this.
And you have a YouTube channel, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Where you talk about some of these topics. So could you talk a little bit about what your channel's about and the kind of things you talk about?
Sure. So my channel is Neah's Way, and I started out kind of documenting our off-grid schoolie adventure that we had. And so if you scroll back and look at all my old videos, that's what you'll find there. But I pivoted back to talking about my healing journey and nutrition, and talking about yoga and the type of fitness I do, and also things that I think about, personal development type of things, because I just think all of that is so connected. And nutrition and health is the foundation that everything else is built on, in my opinion. We can't think straight and make good decisions and be loving and be good partners and good mothers and fathers and if we're sick. And I think, so if there's anything I can help people with by sharing my story and making videos, it's that, we're in a crazy world. There's all kinds of things going on, and there's all kinds of decisions that we have to make, and things aren't going to probably get any easier. That's just how life is. And if we want to show up in the world as our best, most competent selves, we've got to start at that bedrock with our health. And so I think carnivore, that's been so many people's carnivore experience, has just been, completely changing their life around and realizing what they can actually accomplish and what potential they do have and how much better they can be, because they feel good now and all of their chronic issues are going away. And that's been my experience. And so my purpose for sharing content and creating content is to try to be the best example of self-experimentation and working on my mindset and training myself to be, better and be the best person that I can. And carnivore is definitely a part of that. And so that's the type of videos I make.
Very nice. So, Neah, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your journey. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.